The blood-red sun sank behind the distant mountains as Viola Keller stumbled on the dusty road leading to Kingston, Nevada. Her once fine dress was torn at the hem, her fingers raw from clinging to the underside of a freight wagon for the last 10 miles. Freedom tasted like dust and desperation, but it was sweeter than the alternative she'd left behind. Kingston, Nevada gleamed in the distance like a mirage in the desert heat of August, 1876. The small mining town had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby hills 3 years prior. Now it boasted a general store, 2 saloons, a small hotel, and the pristine white church that stood on the hill overlooking the town like a sentinel. That church would be her salvation or her ruin. Viola's throat burned with thirst as she approached the outskirts of town. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, a small pouch of coins sewn into her petticoat, and a letter of recommendation from her former employer in San Francisco. The letter was her only hope of securing a position as the town's new schoolteacher if they would have her. The town's main street was surprisingly busy for dusk. Men in dusty work clothes moved between the saloons, while women in calico dresses hurried to finish their shopping before nightfall. Viola kept her head down, aware of how she must look a woman alone, disheveled, clearly not from around these parts. "You lost, miss." A gruff voice startled her. She looked up to see an older man with a gray handlebar mustache peering at her from beneath the brim of a worn hat. "No, sir. I'm looking for the mayor's office or perhaps the church. I'm here about the teaching position." The man's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Teaching position. Mayor Thornton's at the church now for the town meeting. They're deciding on that very matter tonight." He pointed up the hill. "White building. Can't miss it." Viola's heart sank. She had hoped to clean up, to present herself properly before meeting with the town officials. Now she would have to face them looking like she'd been dragged behind a horse. "Thank you," she managed, clutching her small bag tighter and setting off toward the church. The climb up the hill seemed to take forever. Each step sent dust swirling around her ankles, and she could feel the weight of curious eyes on her back as she passed. The church bells tolled 7 times, and Viola quickened her pace. She couldn't afford to be late. Lights spilled from the church windows, and the sound of animated voices carried through the evening air. Taking a deep breath, Viola straightened her spine, brushed what dust she could from her skirts, and approached the double doors. Inside, the church was packed with townspeople. At the front, standing behind a podium, was a portly man in a fine suit who could only be Mayor Thornton. Beside him stood a severe-looking woman with steel-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features. "And as I was saying," the mayor continued, "Miss Winters comes highly recommended from Sacramento. She's taught for 6 years and has excellent references." The stern woman beside him nodded primly. Viola's heart sank further. They had already found a teacher. Her journey, her escape, had all been for nothing. A man in the front row stood up. "With all due respect, Mayor, $25 a month is steep for a schoolteacher's salary. The mine hasn't been producing as well lately, and the children's education is worth every penny." The severe woman interrupted. Viola took a hesitant step forward, and the floorboard beneath her creaked loudly. Every head in the church turned toward her. Mayor Thornton squinted. "Can we help you, miss?" Summoning all her courage, Viola walked down the center aisle, conscious of her bedraggled appearance and the whispers that followed her. "My name is Viola Keller. I've come about the teaching position." She pulled the letter from her bag and extended it toward the mayor. "I have a recommendation from my previous employer in San Francisco." The severe woman, clearly Miss Winters, scoffed. "The position has been filled." The mayor took the letter reluctantly, his nose wrinkling slightly at Viola's dusty appearance. "As you can see, Miss Keller, was it? We've already selected our new teacher." He barely glanced at the letter before handing it back. "Sir, if I may," Viola began, "I understand you're offering $25 a month. I would work for 20. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Miss Winter's face flushed crimson. "This is outrageous. You can't possibly consider this vagabond over someone with my qualifications." The mayor looked uncomfortable. "Miss Keller, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, we require someone with proper credentials and presentation." Viola stood straighter. "I taught for 3 years in San Francisco at the Madison School for Girls. Before that, I attended the normal school in Boston. My appearance is only due to the difficulty of my journey." "A likely story," Miss Winters sniffed. "No respectable woman would arrive in town in such a state. One has to wonder what she's running from." The whispers grew louder. Viola could feel her opportunity slipping away. "I can assure you, I think we've heard enough," the mayor interrupted. "Miss Winters has already accepted our offer." An older woman stood up from a pew. "Perhaps we should check her references, Thomas. $20 a month would save the town quite a bit." "Marjorie, please," the mayor sighed. "Look at her. Would you want someone like this teaching your grandchildren?" Viola felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Miss Winters stepped forward. "I suggest this woman leave before we're forced to question why she's really here. No decent woman travels alone, appearing as she does." "I had no choice," Viola said, her voice shaking. "My stagecoach was robbed outside of Reno. I had to make my way here as best I could." "A convenient tale," Miss Winters said coldly. A man from the back called out, "Maybe she's running from the law." Another voice joined in, "Or running from a husband." The accusations came faster now, and Viola found herself backing toward the door as the congregation rose to their feet. Mayor Thornton banged a gavel, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. "I think you should leave, Miss Keller," he said firmly. "Kingston is a respectable town. We don't need your kind here." "My kind," Viola whispered, but her words were lost in the growing hostility of the crowd. Several men moved toward her, their intent clear to remove her from the premises. Viola turned and hurried toward the door, but not quickly enough. Rough hands grabbed her arms, propelling her through the entrance and onto the church steps. "Please," she begged. "I have nowhere else to go." "Try the saloon," someone jeered. "They might have worked for a woman like you." Tears sprang to Viola's eyes as she was pushed down the first step. She stumbled, barely catching her balance, only to be shoved again. Her ankle twisted painfully, and she cried out, falling to her knees on the wooden steps. The crowd had followed her outside, their faces distorted with a righteousness that bordered on cruelty. Viola tried to stand, but another push sent her sprawling. Her letter of recommendation fluttered from her hand, dancing away on the evening breeze. "Stop!" a deep voice commanded. The crowd fell silent. Viola looked up through her tears to see a man striding up the path toward the church. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed, his spurs jingling slightly with each step. The setting sun silhouetted him dramatically tall, broad-shouldered, with a gun belt slung low on his hips and a black Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet churchyard. Mayor Thornton stepped forward, straightening his waistcoat. "Just removing an undesirable Fletcher. Nothing that concerns you, Fletcher." The name rippled through the crowd in whispers. The man Fletcher stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at Viola, still crumpled where she had fallen. His eyes were startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "You all right, madam?" he asked quietly. Viola couldn't speak, could only nod shakily. Fletcher turned his attention back to the mayor. Seems to me a whole town ganging up on one woman is hardly a fair fight, Thornton. She's trying to steal the teaching position, someone called out. Showed up looking like that and expected us to hire her over Miss Winters. Fletcher's gaze swept over Viola again, taking in her torn dress and disheveled appearance. Then, to her surprise, he extended a hand toward her. "Let me help you up, Miss Keller," she whispered. "Viola Keller." His hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers, helping her to her feet. She winced as she put weight on her injured ankle. "These good folks pushing women down church steps now?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild as his eyes hardened. "She's not welcome here," Miss Winters declared from the top of the steps. "We have standards in Kingston." Fletcher's laugh was without humor. "Standards? That's rich, coming from a town built on mining claims and whiskey." He turned to face the crowd, still keeping a supportive hand on Viola's elbow. "Miss Keller stays. She stands with me." A shocked silence followed his words. Mayor Thornton found his voice first. "Now see here, Patterson, you might own the biggest ranch in the county, but you don't run this town. The council has decided." "I don't give a damn what you've decided," Fletcher Patterson said calmly. "I see a woman being bullied by folks who should know better." His hand moved slightly to rest on the butt of his revolver, not drawing it, just reminding everyone it was there. "Anyone else have something to say about where Miss Keller belongs?" The crowd shuffled uncomfortably, but no one spoke. "Didn't think so." He turned to Viola. "Can you walk, or shall I carry you?" Viola tested her ankle, grimacing. "I can walk, slowly." Fletcher nodded and addressed the crowd once more. "Miss Keller will be staying at my sister's boarding house. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." His eyes found Miss Winters. "And as for the teaching position, I believe the school board has 3 members, of which I am one." "We haven't voted yet, have we?" the mayor sputtered. "This meeting was called precisely for that purpose." "Then I vote we review both candidates properly, tomorrow, after Miss Keller has had a chance to clean up and rest." Without waiting for a response, Fletcher turned, offering his arm to Viola. "Shall we, Miss Keller?" Viola hesitated only a moment before taking his arm. She could feel the hard muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt and the steady strength as he supported her weight. They began to make their way down the path, away from the church, with the stunned congregation watching in silence. "Thank you," Viola whispered when they were out of earshot. Fletcher Patterson glanced down at her, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Keller. Kingston can be an unforgiving place for outsiders, and you've just made yourself connected to the most controversial man in town." "Still," she said, "it's better than being thrown down the church steps." To her surprise, a smile cracked his serious expression, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "That it is, Miss Keller, that it is." They continued down the hill toward the town, the dust settling around their feet as the light faded from the sky. Behind them, the church bell tolled once more, as if marking the beginning of something neither of them could have anticipated. Fletcher Patterson's sister's boarding house stood at the east end of Kingston's Main Street, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and surprisingly tidy flower beds out front. Light spilled from the windows, warm and inviting after the hostility of the church. "My sister Fay runs the cleanest boarding house in 3 counties, Fletcher explained as they approached. "She takes in respectable boarders only, mostly minors' widows, unmarried ladies, and the occasional teacher." He gave Viola a sidelong glance. "She'll have you fixed up in no time." Before they reached the porch steps, the front door swung open, revealing a petite woman with the same striking blue eyes as Fletcher. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple blue dress with an apron tied around her waist. "Fletcher Patterson, what trouble have you brought to my door this time?" she called, though her tone held more exasperation than anger. "Evening, Fay," Fletcher replied, guiding Viola carefully up the steps. "This is Miss Viola Keller. She needs a room and some tending to." Fay's keen eyes took in Viola's disheveled appearance, her twisted ankle, and the way she leaned on Fletcher for support. Instead of the judgment Viola had come to expect, Fay's expression softened with concern. "You poor thing. Come inside before you collapse." She held the door wide. "Fletcher, bring her to the parlor. I'll fetch some hot water and bandages." The interior of the boarding house was as neat and welcoming as its exterior suggested. Floral wallpaper lined the entryway, and polished wooden floors gleamed in the lamplight. Fletcher guided Viola to a comfortable settee in the parlor, helping her to sit before stepping back respectfully. "I'll be going now," he said, removing his hat. "Got to check on things at the ranch." "Wait," Viola said, reaching for his hand without thinking. "I don't even know who you are, not really. Why did you help me?" Fletcher looked down at her hand on his expression unreadable. "Fletcher Patterson. I run the Triple P ranch outside town. As for why," he shrugged. "Let's just say I've seen how cruel people can be to outsiders." "Didn't sit right with me." Fay returned with a basin of steaming water, clean cloths, and what looked like a medical kit. "Don't you dare leave yet, Fletcher. I need to know what happened." She knelt before Viola and gently began removing her boot. "This might hurt, dear." Viola winced as Fay examined her ankle. "It's not broken, just a bad sprain. I'll wrap it tight, and you'll need to stay off it for a few days." As Fay worked, Fletcher recounted what had happened at the church, his jaw tightening as he described the scene he'd come upon. Viola noticed he left out his declaration that she stands with him, describing his intervention in more practical terms. "Those self-righteous hypocrites," Fay muttered, skillfully wrapping Viola's ankle. "Half the town has secrets they'd rather keep hidden, yet they're quick to judge a stranger." She tied off the bandage and looked up at Viola. "There now. Let's get you a bath and some clean clothes. I have a vacant room that will do nicely." "I can't pay much," Viola admitted. "I had planned to use my savings for room and board once I secured the teaching position." Fay waved dismissively. "We'll worry about that later. First things first." She turned to her brother. "Fletcher, there's stew on the stove. Eat before you go." It was clearly a command rather than an offer. Fletcher nodded, placing his hat on a side table. "Yes, madam." Fay helped Viola to her feet. "Lean on me. The bathroom's just down the hall. I'll have Molly bring up hot water." As they moved slowly from the room, Viola glanced back at Fletcher. He stood watching them, his expression thoughtful. When their eyes met, he gave a slight nod before turning toward what she presumed was the kitchen. The bath was heavenly. Fay had provided a clean nightgown and robe, promising to see about proper clothes in the morning. By the time Viola emerged, her hair damp and her skin pink from scrubbing, she felt human again. Fay was waiting to help her to her room, a small but comfortable chamber with a single bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the main street. The sheets were crisp and clean, and a small vase of wildflowers sat on the bedside table. "I've brought you some stew and bread," Fay said, indicating a tray on the dresser. "Eat, then rest. We'll talk more in the morning." "I don't know how to thank you," Viola said, sinking gratefully onto the bed. Fay smiled. "No need. Any friend of Fletcher's is welcome here." "We're not friends," Viola corrected quickly. "We only just met." Something knowing flickered in Fay's eyes. "My brother doesn't stick his neck out for just anyone, Miss Keller. Whatever his reasons, he clearly saw something in you worth defending." She moved to the door. "Good night. Sleep well." After Fay left, Viola ate the rich beef stew and crusty bread, realizing only as she ate how famished she was. The events of the day swirled in her mind as exhaustion began to claim her. The hostility at the church, the humiliation of being pushed down the steps, and the unexpected appearance of Fletcher Patterson with his quiet authority and piercing blue eyes. "She stands with me." His words echoed in her mind as she drifted off to sleep. They were just words, she told herself. Words from a stranger who happened to witness a wrong and decided to right it. Nothing more. Yet as sleep claimed her, Viola couldn't help but wonder why a man like Fletcher Patterson would risk the town's goodwill for someone he didn't know. And why, despite everything, she felt safer than she had in months simply knowing he was somewhere nearby. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the distant clanging of the mine bell signaling the day shift. Viola woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the ache in her ankle reminded her of yesterday's events. A soft knock at the door preceded Faye's cheerful entry. "Good morning. I've brought you some breakfast and something that might interest you." She set down a tray with coffee, eggs, and toast, then produced a folded newspaper. "This arrived on yesterday's stage. I thought you might want to look at the back page." Curious, Viola accepted the paper and turned to the indicated page. There, in bold print, was an advertisement. Schoolteacher wanted for Kingston, Nevada. Position begins September 1st. Salary $25/month with room and board provided. Apply to mayor's office or school board. "But yesterday they said they had already hired someone," Viola said, confused. Faye smiled slyly. "That was Miss Winter's assumption. The truth is they advertised in several newspapers and received multiple applications, including hers. The final decision was supposed to be made last night." She sat on the edge of the bed. "Fletcher rode out early this morning to speak with Mr. Simmons. He's the third member of the school board, besides Fletcher and the mayor." "Why would he do that?" Viola asked, taking a sip of the strong black coffee. "Because my brother is nothing if not thorough. He wants to make sure you get a fair hearing." Faye's eyes twinkled. "Also, I might have mentioned that I took a peek at your letter of recommendation while you were bathing. Quite impressive credentials, Miss Keller." Viola flushed. "You read my letter. I had to fish it out of your dress to soak the dirt stains. The seal was already broken." Faye didn't look the least bit apologetic. "Madison School for Girls is quite prestigious, and a recommendation from Mrs. Eleanor Stanton carries weight, even out here." "You know of Mrs. Stanton?" Viola was surprised. "I read, Miss Keller. Her writings on women's education are well known in certain circles." Faye stood and moved to the dresser, where she'd placed a stack of folded clothes. "I've brought you some things that should fit. They belonged to our youngest sister, Rose, before she married and moved to Sacramento." Viola set aside her breakfast tray. "You're being incredibly kind to a stranger, Mrs. Miss," Faye corrected. "Miss Faye Patterson, never married, never wanted to. And as for kindness, let's just say I know what it's like to be judged unfairly." She laid out a simple but well-made blue dress. "The school board will reconvene at noon. I suggest you be ready to make your case." After Faye left, Viola dressed carefully in the borrowed clothes, which fit well enough with only minor adjustments. The blue dress complemented her auburn hair, which she brushed until it shone before pinning it into a modest chignon. Looking in the small mirror above the dresser, she barely recognized herself from the desperate woman who had stumbled into Kingston the evening before. Her ankle still throbbed, but Faye had provided a walking stick, which helped considerably. By 11:30, Viola was ready, her letter of recommendation safely tucked into a small reticule Faye had also loaned her. "You look perfectly respectable," Faye declared when Viola emerged from her room. The very image of a proper schoolteacher. I am a proper schoolteacher, Viola said with more confidence than she felt. Of course you are. And after today, everyone will know it. Faye handed her a parasol. The sun is fierce today. Fletcher will be here shortly to escort you to the meeting. True to Faye's word, Fletcher Patterson arrived just before noon. He looked different in the daylight, still imposing, but less mysterious without the dramatic backdrop of the setting sun. He wore clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a vest, his gun belt noticeably absent. His black Stetson was the same, however, and he removed it as he entered the boarding house. "Miss Keller," he greeted, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her transformation. "You're looking much improved." "Thank you, Mr. Patterson, and thank you for your continued assistance." Fletcher nodded, shifting uncomfortably under his sister's knowing gaze. "Shall we? The meeting's at the schoolhouse this time, not the church." The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building at the edge of town, with rows of desks facing a larger desk and blackboard at the front. When Fletcher and Viola arrived, Mayor Thornton and a third man, presumably Mr. Simmons, were already seated at a table placed before the teacher's desk. Miss Winters sat primly on a chair to one side, her spine rigid with disapproval. Several townspeople filled the student desks, including some Viola recognized from the church meeting. Their expressions ranged from curious to hostile as she entered on Fletcher's arm. "Ah, right on time," Mayor Thornton said without enthusiasm. "Please have a seat, Miss Keller." Fletcher guided her to an empty chair opposite Miss Winters, then took his place at the table with the other board members. The contrast between yesterday's hostility and today's formality was jarring. "We're here to consider two candidates for the position of schoolteacher," Mayor Thornton began. "Miss Agatha Winters from Sacramento and Miss Viola Keller from San Francisco. Both have submitted their credentials and letters of recommendation." Mr. Simmons, a thin man with spectacles and a thoughtful expression, leaned forward. "Before we begin, I'd like to address the unfortunate events of yesterday evening. Kingston prides itself on being a civilized community. What happened at the church was neither civilized nor Christian." A murmur went through the assembled townspeople. "That said," the mayor interjected, "we are here to select the most qualified candidate, not to rehash past unpleasantries." "Agreed," Fletcher said firmly. "Let's examine both candidates fairly." For the next hour, Viola and Miss Winters were questioned extensively about their educational backgrounds, teaching methods, and views on discipline. Miss Winters emphasized her strict adherence to traditional methods, while Viola spoke passionately about engaging students' natural curiosity and adapting lessons to different learning styles. "A novel approach," Mr. Simmons remarked, seeming genuinely interested. "Novel, perhaps, but untested," Miss Winters countered. "Children need structure and discipline, not coddling." "I believe children need both structure and encouragement," Viola replied. "My students at Madison showed remarkable improvement when their individual strengths were recognized and nurtured." The questioning continued, with Mayor Thornton clearly favoring Miss Winters and Fletcher subtly advocating for Viola. Mr. Simmons remained thoughtful and noncommittal, asking probing questions of both candidates. Finally, Mayor Thornton called for a brief recess while the board deliberated. As the three men moved to a corner of the room, speaking in low tones, Miss Winters approached Viola. "You're wasting your time," she said quietly. "Even if by some miracle you secure this position, the town has already made up its mind about you. You'll never be accepted here." "Perhaps," Viola replied, meeting the woman's cold gaze steadily. "But I've never been one to let others' opinions determine my worth." Miss Winter's lips thinned. It's not just about you anymore. You've aligned yourself with Patterson. That alone makes you suspect. Before Viola could ask what she meant, the board members returned to the table. The room fell silent as Mayor Thornton cleared his throat. After careful deliberation, the school board has reached a decision. He glanced at his colleagues, clearly displeased. By a vote of 2-1, Miss Viola Keller is appointed schoolteacher of Kingston, effective immediately, at a salary of $22 per month, with room and board to be provided. A collective gasp went through the room. Miss Winters stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. Clearly, Mr. Patterson's influence has corrupted this process. The vote was fair, Agatha, Mr. Simmons said firmly. Miss Keller's credentials are impressive, and her teaching philosophy aligns with the progressive vision some of us have for Kingston's future. Progressive? Miss Winters spat the word. Is that what you call allowing a woman of questionable character to teach our children? A woman who arrived in town looking like she'd crawled out of a saloon and immediately attached herself to the most notorious man in the county. That's enough. Fletcher's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Miss Keller's character is not in question here. Her qualifications speak for themselves. Do they? Miss Winters challenged. Then perhaps she should explain why she really left San Francisco. Why a teacher from such a prestigious school would suddenly seek employment in a remote mining town. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to Viola. She felt the weight of their scrutiny, the suspicion that had followed her since her arrival. I left because I was offered an opportunity, Viola said carefully. The school was closing due to financial difficulties, and I wished to continue teaching. When I saw the advertisement for Kingston, it seemed like providence. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. The school had closed after the scandal that had forced her to flee. Miss Winters seemed ready to press further, but Mayor Thornton intervened. The board has made its decision. Miss Keller will begin her duties on September 1st, with classes commencing on the 4th. Miss Winters, on behalf of the town, I apologize for any inconvenience. The meeting broke up shortly after, with Miss Winters storming out and the townspeople dispersing in small groups. Their whispered conversations undoubtedly centered on the surprising outcome. Viola remained seated, still processing the sudden turn in her fortunes. Congratulations, Miss Keller, Fletcher said, approaching as the room emptied. You've won your position fairly. Did I? She asked quietly. Or did you secure it for me out of some misplaced sense of chivalry? Fletcher's expression hardened slightly. I voted for you because you're qualified. So did Simmons. Your ideas about education impressed him, they impressed me too. Don't mistake kindness for charity, Miss Keller. Viola flushed. I apologize, I'm not accustomed to. Good fortune. His expression softened. Few of us are. Come, I'll walk you back to Faye's. You should rest that ankle. As they stepped outside, Viola was aware of the townspeople watching them, their gazes curious and still somewhat suspicious. Fletcher seemed oblivious or perhaps simply unconcerned as he offered his arm once more. Mr. Patterson, Viola said as they walked slowly down the street, Miss Winters called you notorious. What did she mean by that? Fletcher's jaw tightened. Kingston has a long memory, Miss Keller. My reputation was earned honestly enough, though some might dispute that. He glanced down at her. Let's just say I wasn't always the respectable rancher you see before you. And now I mind my business and expect others to do the same. His tone discouraged further questions. The teachers' quarters aren't ready yet. They've been empty since old Miss Perkins retired last spring. You're welcome to stay at Faye's until they're prepared. That's very kind, but Faye could use the company, Fletcher interrupted. And the help. Her arthritis has been troubling her lately, though she'd never admit it. Viola realized he was offering her a way to maintain her dignity work in exchange for lodging until her first salary came through. "I'd be happy to help your sister in any way I can," she said. They had reached the boarding house. Fletcher stopped at the bottom of the porch steps but didn't release her arm immediately. "Miss Keller, a word of advice. Kingston is small and gossip travels fast. Whatever your reasons for coming here, whatever you're leaving behind, and everyone's leaving something behind out here, it would be wise to be circumspect about our association." "Our association, people talk," he said simply. "A woman alone attracts attention. A woman seen frequently in my company attracts speculation. Neither will help you establish yourself as the town's teacher." Viola withdrew her arm from his, feeling strangely hurt by his practical assessment. "I understand, Mr. Patterson. I wouldn't want to damage your reputation further by association." Fletcher sighed. "It's not my reputation I'm concerned with, Miss Keller. It's yours." He placed his hat back on his head, tipping it slightly. "Good day. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other around town." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Viola standing alone on the boarding house steps, her victory as the new schoolteacher suddenly feeling hollow. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity as Viola prepared for the start of the school year. The teachers' quarters, a small but comfortable room attached to the schoolhouse, were cleaned and repaired under Mayor Thornton's reluctant supervision. Meanwhile, Viola stayed at Faye's boarding house, helping with cooking and light housekeeping in exchange for room and board. True to his word, Fletcher kept his distance, visiting his sister only when necessary and maintaining a polite but distant demeanor toward Viola on the few occasions they encountered each other. She told herself it was for the best she hadn't come to Kingston looking for complications, especially not in the form of a man with secrets as deep as her own. As September 1st approached, Viola found herself gradually gaining acceptance in the community. Her ankle healed, allowing her to move freely around town. She made a point of introducing herself to the parents of her future students, visiting the general store daily to become a familiar face, and even attending Sunday services at the church where she had once been so unwelcome. Reverend Walsh, who had been conspicuously absent during the infamous church meeting, proved to be a kind, scholarly man who welcomed her warmly to his congregation. "Judge not, lest ye be judged," he reminded his parishioners pointedly during her first Sunday attendance, his eyes sweeping meaningfully over those who had participated in her humiliation. The morning of September 1st dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching late summer day. Viola rose early, eager to finally move into the teachers' quarters and begin organizing her classroom. Faye had helped her acquire suitable teaching materials, and the town had provided a small budget for additional books and supplies. "You're up with the roosters," Faye observed, finding Viola already dressed and sipping coffee in the kitchen. "I couldn't sleep," Viola admitted. "Today feels like a new beginning." Faye smiled, easing herself into a chair with a slight wince that betrayed her arthritis. "It is. Though I'll miss having you here." "I'll still visit often," Viola promised, "and I meant what I said about helping with the mending and accounts." "I know you did." Faye poured herself coffee. "Fletcher's coming by this morning to help move your things." "Don't give me that look, he's my brother, and he has a wagon. Besides, your reputation is secure enough now that a bit of neighborly help won't set tongues wagging too fiercely." Despite her protest that she had little enough to move, Fletcher arrived after breakfast with his wagon. He nodded a greeting to Viola before efficiently loading her trunk and the few boxes of books and supplies she had accumulated. "The schoolhouse key," he said, handing her a heavy iron key once everything was loaded. "Mayor asked me to give it to you." His tone suggested the mayor had done no such thing, but Viola accepted the key without comment. The ride to the schoolhouse was brief and mostly silent. Viola found herself stealing glances at Fletcher's profile as he guided the horses through town. The past 2 weeks had done nothing to diminish his effect on her. If anything, his deliberate distance had only made her more aware of him. "Something on your mind, Miss Keller?" he asked without looking at her. Viola flushed, caught staring. "I was just wondering why a rancher would take time away from his work to help move a few boxes." Fletcher's mouth quirked. Faye asked, "I rarely refuse her anything." "You're close then." "She practically raised me and Rose after our parents died. I was 12, Rose just 8. His expression softened with memory. Faye was 18. Could have married, started her own family. Instead, she took on 2 half-wild children and made sure we grew up right. "She's remarkable," Viola agreed. "You're fortunate to have each other." "Family's everything out here," Fletcher said simply. They reached the schoolhouse, and Fletcher unloaded her belongings with the same quiet efficiency he seemed to bring to every task. When everything was inside, he hesitated at the door. "Need anything else?" Viola shook her head. "No, thank you. I can manage from here." He nodded, turning to leave, then paused. "The children start Monday." "Yes, I've been told to expect about 20 students ages 6 to 16. Jacob Miller's boy, Tom, he's smart but has trouble sitting still. Jenny Harris can't see the blackboard from the back row but won't admit it. And the Swenson twins will try your patience, but they mean well." Fletcher delivered this information matter-of-factly, then seemed embarrassed by his unsolicited advice. "Not that you asked." Viola smiled, touched by his unexpected insight. "I appreciate knowing. Are you on the school board because you have children attending?" Something dark flickered across his face. "No, no children. I serve because education matters, especially out here where opportunities are limited." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good day, Miss Keller. Good luck with your preparations." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Viola with the strange feeling that she had glimpsed something important about Fletcher Patterson, something he preferred to keep hidden. The weekend passed quickly as Viola arranged her classroom and settled into her new quarters. By Monday morning, she was ready, standing at the schoolhouse door in her best dress, bell in hand, as children began arriving with their parents. Just as Fletcher had warned, Tom Miller couldn't sit still. Jenny Harris squinted at the blackboard, and the Swenson twins Elias and Elijah seemed determined to see how far they could push their new teacher. By day's end, Viola was exhausted but exhilarated. These were her students now, her responsibility, and she was determined to serve them well. As the weeks passed, Viola found her rhythm. The townspeople gradually warmed to her as their children came home enthusiastic about their lessons. Even Mayor Thornton grudgingly acknowledged her success when his granddaughter proudly recited a poem she had memorized for class. Faye's boarding house became a regular Sunday dinner destination, though Fletcher was often absent, busy with ranch matters or simply making himself scarce when Viola visited. On the rare occasions they did encounter each other, their interactions remained politely distant, though Viola sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. October brought cooler weather and the town's harvest festival. The schoolhouse closed for 2 days as everyone participated in the celebrations, which included a dance in the town square. Viola attended at her students' insistence, watching from the sidelines as couples twirled to the lively music of fiddles and harmonicas. "Not dancing, Miss Keller?" Reverend Walsh asked, appearing beside her with a cup of punch. "No one's asked," she replied with a smile, accepting the drink. Besides, it wouldn't be proper. The Reverend chuckled. Propriety is a flexible concept at a harvest festival. Look, even Mayor Thornton is attempting a jig. Sure enough, the portly mayor was gallantly leading Fay Patterson in a somewhat ungainly dance, both of them laughing as they narrowly avoided colliding with other couples. Fay looks well, Viola observed. Her arthritis seems better. The dry weather helps, a deep voice said from behind them. Viola turned to find Fletcher standing there, looking uncharacteristically formal in a clean white shirt and dark vest. He nodded to the Reverend before addressing Viola. "Evening, Miss Keller. Enjoying the festivities?" "Very much," she replied, suddenly conscious of her heartbeat quickening. "Though I confess to being a spectator rather than a participant." "That can be remedied," Fletcher said, extending his hand. "May I have this dance?" Viola hesitated, remembering his warning about their association. The Reverend, noting her hesitation, smiled encouragingly. "Go on, Miss Keller. No one will think anything of it at a town celebration." With a small nod, Viola placed her hand in Fletcher's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, as he led her to the makeshift dance floor. The musicians had just begun a waltz, slower and more intimate than the lively reels that had preceded it. Fletcher placed a respectful hand at her waist, maintaining a proper distance as they began to move with the music. "I didn't expect to see you here," Viola admitted as they turned in a graceful circle. "Fay insisted," he replied. "Said I spend too much time at the ranch. Is she wrong?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Probably not. Fay rarely is." They moved together with surprising ease, as if they had danced 100 times before. Viola was achingly aware of his hand at her waist, the strength in his shoulders beneath her fingertips, the subtle scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "People are watching," she murmured, noting the curious glances directed their way. "Let them," Fletcher said simply. "You've earned their respect these past weeks. One dance won't change that." The music swelled, and Fletcher guided her through a turn that brought them momentarily closer. For an instant, Viola saw something in his eyes, a warmth, a longing before he blinked, and it was gone. "Mr. Patterson," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "Fletcher," he corrected quietly. "After everything, I think you could call me Fletcher when we're not in formal company." "Fletcher," she repeated, liking the feel of his name on her lips. "Thank you for the dance and for everything before." He nodded, his expression softening slightly. As the music ended, he stepped back, releasing her with what seemed like reluctance. "My pleasure, Miss Keller." "Viola," she offered in return, "when we're not in formal company." A genuine smile transformed his face, revealing that disarming dimple in his left cheek. "Viola," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of several of Viola's students, all chattering excitedly and pulling her away to see the carved pumpkins on display. By the time she extricated herself, Fletcher had disappeared into the crowd. The festival continued late into the night, but Fletcher didn't approach her again, and Viola tried to ignore the disappointment that settled in her chest. It was just a dance, she reminded herself. Nothing more. Yet as she walked back to her quarters in the cool night air, Viola couldn't help but feel that something had shifted between them. Some invisible barrier had begun to crumble, revealing possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider until now. November brought the first dusting of snow to Kingston, turning the dusty streets into muddy thoroughfares when the sun rose high enough to melt the fragile white blanket. Viola's classroom remained warm thanks to the pot-bellied stove in the corner, kept stocked with firewood by Tom Miller and Elias Swenson, who competed for the honor of being teacher's helper. As Thanksgiving approached, Viola incorporated holiday traditions into her lessons, having the children write essays about what they were thankful for and rehearse a short play to perform for their parents. The town had gradually accepted her as one of their own, the incident on the church steps seemingly forgotten or at least politely ignored. Her encounters with Fletcher remained frustratingly brief and public. He attended school board meetings, nodding politely as she presented her reports. Occasionally, she spotted him in town, tipping his hat as they passed on the street. The warmth she had glimpsed during their dance seemed to have retreated behind his customary reserve. "You're mooning again," Faye observed one Sunday afternoon as they prepared dinner in the boarding house kitchen. "I'm doing no such thing," Viola protested, focusing intently on the potatoes she was peeling. Faye chuckled. "Your face gives you away every time his name is mentioned. Fletcher this, Fletcher that, you don't even realize you're doing it. That's absurd. I hardly see your brother." "Which is precisely the problem." Faye set down her knife and turned to face Viola directly. "Look, I know my brother. He's keeping his distance because he thinks it's best for you, always worried about everyone else's reputation while ignoring his own happiness." "There's nothing between us to worry about," Viola insisted. "Not yet," Faye agreed. "But there could be if either of you had the courage to admit it." Before Viola could respond, the front door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and the subject of their conversation. Fletcher stamped snow from his boots in the hallway before entering the kitchen, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "Smells good in here," he remarked, hanging his coat on a hook by the door. His eyes met Viola's briefly before he turned his attention to his sister. "Need any help?" "Perfect timing," Faye said, handing him a basket. "We need more firewood." When he had gone outside to the woodpile, Viola gave Faye an accusing look. "You did that deliberately." "Of course I did." "Someone has to do something, or you'll both spend the rest of your lives circling each other like skittish colts." Faye returned to her cooking with a satisfied smile. "Take him some coffee, will you? It's bitter cold out there." Recognizing defeat, Viola poured a mug of coffee and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders before stepping outside. Fletcher was at the woodpile, his back to her as he split logs with powerful, practiced swings of the axe. "I brought you coffee," she called, not wanting to startle him. Fletcher turned, setting the axe down carefully before approaching. "Thank you." His fingers brushed hers as he accepted the mug, sending a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. They stood in awkward silence as he sipped the hot drink. Snowflakes drifted lazily around them, catching in his dark hair and on the shoulders of his shirt. "Your sister thinks we're avoiding each other," Viola said finally. Fletcher's mouth quirked. "Faye has opinions about everything. Is she wrong?" He considered this, his blue eyes studying her face. "No," he admitted, "she's not wrong." "Why?" Viola asked softly. "After the dance, I thought perhaps." "Perhaps what? That I'd court the school teacher and give the gossips more fuel." He shook his head. "You've worked hard to build a respectable position here. I won't jeopardize that." "Shouldn't that be my decision?" Viola challenged. "You speak of my reputation as if it's something fragile that needs protecting." "I'm not a china doll, Fletcher." "No, you're not," he agreed, his voice lowering. "You're the strongest woman I've met in a long while. That doesn't mean I want to make things harder for you." "And if I said your absence makes things harder?" The words escaped before she could reconsider them, hanging in the cold air between them. Fletcher's expression softened. He set down the coffee mug on a nearby stump and took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Viola," he began, her name a caress on his lips. "There you are," Faye's voice called from the porch. "Dinner's ready and Reverend Walsh has arrived." "Come in before you both catch your death," the moment shattered. Fletcher stepped back, his expression closing once more. "We should go in." Viola nodded, unable to hide her disappointment. "Yes, I suppose we should." As they walked back to the house, Fletcher spoke quietly without looking at her. "This conversation isn't finished." It was a promise, however small, and Viola held it close as they rejoined the others inside. Dinner was a cheerful affair despite the undercurrent of tension between Viola and Fletcher. Reverend Walsh was an entertaining guest, full of stories from his younger days as a missionary in the Arizona Territory. As dessert was served Faye's famous apple pie, the conversation turned to the approaching holidays. "The children's Christmas pageant is coming along nicely," Viola reported. "We'll perform it the last day of school before the holiday. The whole town is looking forward to it," the Reverend said. "It's been years since we had a proper Christmas celebration at the school." "Speaking of celebrations," Faye interjected, "the Founders' Day dance is next Saturday. The whole town will be there." Viola had heard her students talking about the dance, apparently an annual tradition commemorating Kingston's founding. "I'm not sure I'll attend," she said carefully. "I have lessons to prepare for the following week." "Nonsense," Faye declared. "Even teachers need recreation." "Fletcher will escort you, won't you, brother?" Fletcher, caught in the middle of a bite of pie, looked up with a startled expression that might have been comical under different circumstances. He swallowed before answering. "If Miss Keller wishes it," he said formally. 3 pairs of eyes turned expectantly to Viola. Put on the spot, she felt her cheeks warm. "That would be acceptable, thank you." Faye looked triumphant, the Reverend amused, and Fletcher well. Fletcher's expression was unreadable as always, though Viola thought she detected a hint of pleasure in his eyes. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of school activities and preparation for the Founders' Day dance. When Saturday arrived, Viola found herself uncharacteristically nervous as she prepared for the evening. The blue dress Faye had loaned her months ago had since been altered to fit her perfectly, and she had even splurged on a new ribbon for her hair at the general store. Fletcher arrived precisely at 7, looking uncommonly formal in a dark suit and crisp white shirt. His usually unruly hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard. He stood awkwardly in the doorway of her quarters, hat in hand. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." A smile touched his lips. Faye's influence. She threatened to come at me with scissors herself if I didn't make an effort. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with evergreen boughs and red ribbons decorating the walls and a massive pine tree standing in one corner, adorned with candles and handmade ornaments. Nearly everyone in Kingston seemed to be in attendance, from the youngest children to the oldest residents. Mayor Thornton approached as they entered, his initial wariness giving way to grudging acceptance as he greeted them. "Miss Keller, Patterson, glad you could join us." "Wouldn't miss it, Mayor," Fletcher replied with more diplomacy than Viola had come to expect from him. The band struck up a lively tune, and couples began to fill the dance floor. Fletcher turned to Viola with a slight bow. "Shall we?" This time, there was no hesitation as she placed her hand in his. They moved together seamlessly, as they had at the Harvest Festival, but with a new awareness between them. Fletcher held her a fraction closer, his hand more certain at her waist, his eyes rarely leaving hers as they navigated the crowded floor. "People are still watching," Viola noted, though with less concern than before. "Let them see that I'm proud to be escorting the town's teacher," Fletcher replied. "Besides, I have a reputation for doing exactly as I please. No sense disappointing them now." Viola laughed, the sound drawing smiles from those nearby. "Is that what you're doing, pleasing yourself?" His expression grew serious, though his eyes remained warm. "Being near you is the most pleasure I've allowed myself in a very long time." The simple honesty of his statement took her breath away. Before she could respond, the music ended and Fletcher reluctantly released her. "Would you like some punch?" he asked. "Yes, please." As Fletcher moved toward the refreshment table, Viola found herself approached by several of her students' mothers, all curious about her escort and not particularly subtle in their questioning. "It's nice to see Fletcher Patterson at a social event," Mrs. Harris remarked. "He usually avoids them like the plague." "He came at his sister's insistence," Viola explained, unwilling to fuel speculation. Mrs. Miller smiled knowingly. "I doubt that's the only reason." "He hasn't taken his eyes off you all evening." Fletcher returned with 2 cups of punch, nodding politely to the women as they dispersed with meaningful glances. "Interrogation complete?" he asked wryly. "For now." Viola accepted the punch gratefully. "You were right about the gossip." "Does it bother you?" She considered this as she sipped her drink. "Less than I thought it would. They seem more curious than judgmental." "Kingston's warming to you," Fletcher observed. "Hard not to." The evening continued pleasantly, with more dancing interspersed with conversations with various townspeople. As the hour grew late and families with young children began to depart, the band shifted to slower, more romantic melodies. During one such dance, Fletcher held Viola closer than propriety strictly allowed, their bodies separated by mere inches as they swayed to the music. "Our conversation from last Sunday," he said quietly. "I believe we were interrupted." "Yes, we were," Viola agreed, her heart quickening. "You were about to say something." Fletcher's eyes darkened. "I was about to do something foolish." "Such as kiss you," he admitted. "Right there in my sister's backyard with snow in your hair and challenge in your eyes." Viola's breath caught. "That doesn't sound foolish at all." "Doesn't it?" His hand at her waist tightened slightly. "You deserve better than a man with my history, Viola." "Perhaps you should let me decide that," she countered. "Once I know what this terrible history entails." Fletcher glanced around the crowded hall. "Not here. Will you walk with me?" The snows stopped. They retrieved their coats and slipped out into the crisp night air. The town was quiet, the streets empty as most of Kingston's population remained at the dance. Fletcher offered his arm, and they walked in silence for a few minutes, their footsteps crunching on the fresh snow. "I wasn't always a rancher," Fletcher began finally. "When I first came to Nevada, I was running from the law in Texas." Viola's step faltered slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "I was young, 22, and stupid. Got involved with some men who robbed a bank in El Paso. I was supposed to be the lookout, but things went wrong. A guard was shot." His voice hardened. "I didn't pull the trigger, but I was there, guilty all the same. What happened? I ran. Made it to Nevada before the fever took me, wound in my side from a lawman's bullet. Would have died if Faye hadn't found me collapsed on the trail and nursed me back to health. She was traveling west with a wagon train, looking for a fresh start herself. They had reached the schoolhouse, its dark windows reflecting the moonlight. Fletcher stopped, turning to face Viola. "When I recovered, Faye convinced me to stay, to build something honest. We used what money I had left to stake a claim on land outside town, worked it until we could afford to send for Rose." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. 15 years of hard work later, the Triple P is one of the most successful ranches in the territory. "And the law, are they still looking for you?" "No. 5 years ago I went back to Texas, turned myself in, stood trial, served a year in prison for my part in the robbery. The man who was shot recovered something I hadn't known. That made the difference in my sentence." Viola processed this revelation, understanding now why Fletcher was so concerned about reputations, why the town's attitude toward him was so complicated. "The town knows," she asked. "Most do. Some remember only that I was once wanted, not that I went back to make it right." He shrugged. "Can't blame them. Once you're branded an outlaw, it's hard to shake the label. Is that why you said I was standing with the most controversial man in town that first night?" "Yes." Fletcher's eyes searched hers in the moonlight. "Now you understand why I've kept my distance. Your reputation is my own to risk," Viola interrupted firmly. "Just as you risked everything to make amends for your past. It's not the same, isn't it?" Viola stepped closer to him, emboldened by his honesty and the stillness of the night around them. "We all have pasts, Fletcher. Things we're running from or trying to atone for." His gaze sharpened. "What are you running from, Viola?" It was her turn for honesty, however difficult. "Scandal. In San Francisco, I was engaged to the son of the school's benefactor. When I discovered he was embezzling from the school funds, I reported him." She swallowed hard. "He denied everything, claimed I had fabricated the accusations because he had ended our engagement. His family believed him." "But it was true." "Yes. He was eventually caught, but not before the damage was done to the school and to my reputation. Mrs. Stanton believed me, supported me, but the school had to close. No other school in San Francisco would hire me after the scandal." Fletcher's expression softened with understanding. "So you came to Kingston for a fresh start." "Just as you once did," Viola confirmed. "We're not so different, you and I." Fletcher reached out slowly, his gloved hand cupping her cheek. "No, I suppose we're not." His thumb brushed across her lower lip. "Still think it wouldn't be foolish for me to kiss you." In answer, Viola rose on tiptoes, closing the distance between them. Their lips met tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as Fletcher's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him. His mouth was warm despite the cold night air, his kiss gentle yet insistent, sending waves of warmth through her body. When they finally parted, both breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you on those church steps," he confessed. Defiant even when outnumbered. "I wasn't feeling particularly defiant," Viola admitted, "mostly terrified. You hide it well." He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "What happens now?" "Now we go back to the dance before we're missed," Viola said practically, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow I'd like to call on you properly if you'll allow it," Fletcher said. "No more hiding behind concerns for your reputation or my past." "I'd like that very much." With reluctance, they separated and began the walk back to the town hall, their hands linked, neither feeling the cold. Winter settled over Kingston with a vengeance in the weeks following the Founders' Day dance. Heavy snows blanketed the town, making travel difficult and turning the schoolroom into a haven of warmth for Viola's students, who arrived each morning with red cheeks and frosted eyelashes. True to his word, Fletcher began courting Viola openly. He escorted her to church on Sundays, brought her small gifts, a book of poetry, wildflower honey from his ranch, a handsome walking stick he had carved himself, and occasionally joined her for dinner at the schoolhouse, always with the door properly left open despite the cold. The town's reaction was mixed but largely accepting. Some, like Reverend Walsh and most of the school parents, seemed pleased by the development. Others maintained a wait-and-see attitude, their judgment reserved but not overtly hostile. Only a few, including Mayor Thornton, expressed open disapproval, though even he was forced to admit that Viola's performance as teacher remained exemplary regardless of her personal associations. Christmas arrived with the children's pageant, a charming if somewhat chaotic retelling of the Nativity that had the audience alternating between laughter and misty eyes. Fletcher sat in the front row beside Faye, his usually stoic expression softening with pride as Viola guided her students through the performance. "You've done wonders with them," he told her afterward as they walked through the snow-covered town to Faye's boarding house for Christmas dinner. Even the Swenson twins remembered their lines. "Mostly," Viola laughed. "I believe the wise men were supposed to bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh, not gold, frankfurters, and mules." Fletcher's laughter joined hers, the sound drawing smiles from those they passed. It was still a novelty in Kingston to see Fletcher Patterson laughing openly. His usual reserve melted away by the schoolteacher's presence. Christmas dinner at Faye's was a joyous affair, with Reverend Walsh joining them once more, along with Dr. Bennett, a widower who had been paying particular attention to Faye lately, and his daughter Sarah, one of Viola's older students. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of people at ease with one another. After dinner, while Faye and the others lingered over dessert, Fletcher drew Viola aside into the small parlor. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple red ribbon. "Fletcher, you've already given me the honey and that beautiful edition of Tennyson's poems," Viola protested. "This is different, special." There was a tension in his voice that intrigued her. Curious, Viola unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside was a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers around the edges. When she opened it, a delicate melody began to play a music box. "It's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the carved flowers with her fingertip. "It was my mother's," Fletcher explained. "One of the few things Faye managed to save after our parents died. The melody is Greensleeves, an English folk song. My father gave it to my mother on their wedding day." The significance of the gift wasn't lost on Viola. This wasn't merely a Christmas present but a family heirloom, something precious and deeply personal. "Fletcher, I can't accept this. It should stay in your family." "That's what I'm hoping for," he said quietly. "That it will." His meaning registered slowly, and Viola's eyes widened as she looked up at him. "Are you not proposing?" "Not yet," he clarified quickly. "It's too soon for that, but I want you to know my intentions, Viola. I'm not courting you idly or passing time." His eyes held hers, serious and sincere. "I'm falling in love with you. Have been since that first night." The confession left her momentarily speechless. They had been courting for barely a month, though their connection had been building since that fateful evening on the church steps. It was soon, perhaps too soon by conventional standards, yet Viola couldn't deny the depth of her own feelings. "I don't expect you to say anything in return," Fletcher continued when she remained silent. "Just accept the gift with the understanding of what it means to me." Finding her voice at last, Viola closed the music box gently. "I do understand, and I accept it with all that it implies." She stepped closer to him, resting her hand on his chest where she could feel his heart beating strongly. "And though it may be soon, I'm falling in love with you too, Fletcher Patterson." The joy that transformed his face was worth any risk, any potential scandal. He caught her hand and pressed it more firmly against his heart. "Then, I'm the luckiest man in Nevada territory." Their kiss was brief, but filled with promise, a promise of more to come, of a future taking shape between them with each passing day. When they rejoined the others, Faye took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. "I see you gave her mother's music box," she said to Fletcher. "It's about time." "Faye," Fletcher warned, though without heat. "What? I've only been waiting 15 years for you to find someone worthy of it." She turned to Viola. "He's been keeping that box in his desk drawer since he was 12 years old, refusing to part with it until he found the right one." "Faye," Fletcher groaned, actually blushing now. Viola squeezed his hand. "I'm honored to be considered worthy of such a treasure." The evening concluded with carols around Faye's piano, with Sarah Bennett displaying her considerable musical talent while the adults sang with varying degrees of skill and enthusiasm. As the night grew late and the first yawns appeared, Fletcher escorted Viola back to her quarters through the silent, snow-covered town. "Merry Christmas, Viola," he said as they paused at her door. "Merry Christmas, Fletcher." She reached up to touch his face, still marveling that this man complicated, honorable, and unexpectedly tender had come into her life. "Thank you for making this the happiest one I can remember." His kiss was gentle, but held a depth of emotion that warmed her despite the frigid night air. When they parted, his eyes reflected the starlight. "Sleep well. I'll see you tomorrow." As Viola prepared for bed, the music box playing softly on her bedside table, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 4 months. From the desperate woman pushed down the church steps to a respected teacher with a place in the community, and a man who loved her. Kingston, which had seemed so hostile upon her arrival, had become home. The new year brought heavy snowstorms that closed the school for several days in January. Viola used the unexpected free time to plan lessons for the spring term and to visit the families of students who lived in town, checking on their progress with the assignments she had sent home. Fletcher, meanwhile, was often absent, the demands of the ranch requiring his constant attention during the harsh winter. Cattle needed extra feed and protection from the elements, and predators grew bold with hunger as the winter deepened. When they did manage time together, Fletcher was often exhausted, though he never complained. By early February, the weather began to moderate slightly. The snow remained but no longer fell constantly, allowing for easier travel. Fletcher invited Viola to visit the Triple P Ranch on a Saturday, promising to show her the place that had been his life's work. Bundled against the cold in a heavy coat borrowed from Faye, Viola rode beside Fletcher in his sleigh, excitement building as they left the town behind and entered open country. The ranch was about 5 miles outside Kingston, situated in a valley protected by hills on 3 sides. "It's not much to look at in winter," Fletcher apologized as they approached the ranch house, a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, promising warmth within. Nearby stood a large barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings, all dusted with snow. "It's wonderful," Viola said sincerely. "How much land do you have?" "About 5,000 acres now," Fletcher replied with quiet pride. "Started with just 500. Added to it over the years as I could afford to." They were met at the door by Mrs. Gunderson, the housekeeper, a formidable Norwegian woman who had been with Fletcher for a decade. She greeted Viola with surprising warmth. "So you're the teacher who's finally caught our Mr. Patterson," she said approvingly. "Good. He works too hard. Needs someone to remind him there's more to life than cattle." "I'm trying, Mrs. Gunderson," Viola replied, liking the woman immediately. Fletcher showed her through the house larger than she had expected, with a spacious parlor, dining room, kitchen, and study on the ground floor and 4 bedrooms upstairs. The furniture was solid and well made if not fancy, and everything was scrupulously clean. "It was smaller when we first built it," Fletcher explained. "Just 4 rooms. I added on as the ranch prospered." He looked almost shy as he showed her the parlor with its large fireplace and comfortable chairs. "Faye decorated it years ago. Said a proper home needed a woman's touch, even if the woman was only visiting occasionally." "She did a lovely job," Viola said, noting the touches that softened the masculine space curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt draped over one chair, a vase that would hold flowers in season. After touring the house, Fletcher took her to see the barn, where he introduced her to his prized horses, including Midnight, the black stallion he usually rode. The animal nuzzled Fletcher's hand affectionately, revealing a softer side to their relationship than Fletcher's practical explanations of bloodlines and training suggested. As they returned to the house for lunch, Viola found herself imagining a life here waking to the view of the valley, helping Fletcher with the accounts in the study, perhaps teaching their children in that very parlor before they were old enough for school. The vision was startlingly clear and deeply appealing. Mrs. Gunderson had prepared a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, which they enjoyed in the dining room while Fletcher told stories of the ranch's early days, the struggles and triumphs, the cattle drives and difficult winters. "You've built something remarkable here," Viola said as they lingered over coffee. "You should be proud." "I am," Fletcher admitted, "though I've been thinking lately that something's missing." His eyes met hers across the table. "Someone to share it with." Before Viola could respond, one of the ranch hands burst into the room, snow clinging to his coat and hat. "Boss, fire in the north pasture shelter. Lightning must have struck during that squall that passed through." Fletcher was on his feet instantly, all tenderness vanishing beneath the mask of the capable rancher. "Get the men. Bring buckets, blankets, anything that might help. I'll be right behind you." He turned to Viola, his expression apologetic but determined. "I have to go." "The cattle, go," she urged, understanding the emergency. "I'll be fine here." With a quick nod, Fletcher grabbed his coat and followed the hand out into the snow. Through the window, Viola watched as men converged on the barn, emerging moments later with buckets and tools before mounting horses and riding north at a gallop. Mrs. Gunderson appeared at her side, her expression concerned but not panicked. "The men know what to do. They'll save what they can." "Is there anything I can do to help?" Viola asked. "They'll be cold and hungry when they return. We can prepare food and coffee, heat water for those who will need it." The housekeeper's practical approach was reassuring. "This isn't the first emergency at Triple P, miss, and it won't be the last." For the next several hours, Viola worked alongside Mrs. Gunderson, preparing a substantial meal and heating water for washing. As the short winter day faded into dusk, they lit lamps and stoked the fires, keeping watch for the returning men. It was well after dark when they finally heard the sound of horses approaching. Viola hurried to the porch, shivering in the cold as she strained to see through the darkness. The men appeared as shadowy figures, moving slowly, some supporting others. Fletcher was among the last to arrive, his face blackened with soot, his coat singed in several places. When he saw Viola waiting, a tired smile broke through the grime. "You're still here," he said, his voice hoarse from smoke. "Of course I am. Are you all right? Is anyone hurt?" "Burns, mostly minor. Johnson got hit by a falling beam, but Doc Bennett's seeing to him at the bunkhouse." Fletcher winced as he dismounted, favoring his right arm. "You're hurt," Viola said, moving to his side. "It's nothing. Burned my arm when a section of the roof came down." He tried to shrug it off, but the pain in his eyes belied his casual tone. "Let me see," Viola insisted, her tone brooking no argument. Inside, she helped him remove his coat and rolled up his sleeve to reveal an angry red burn on his forearm, blistering already. "This isn't nothing, Fletcher," she scolded gently, guiding him to a chair in the kitchen where the light was better. "Mrs. Gunderson, do you have burn salve?" The housekeeper produced a jar of ointment and clean bandages without comment, then went to serve food to the exhausted ranch hands who had begun filing into the kitchen. Viola cleaned the burn carefully, applying the salve and bandaging it while Fletcher sat silently, watching her work. When she finished, she looked up to find his eyes fixed on her face with an expression of wonder. "What?" she asked self-consciously. "I was just thinking," he said quietly, "how right you look here, how natural, as if you've always belonged." The simple statement touched her deeply. "Perhaps I have," she replied. "It just took me a while to find my way here." He captured her hand with his uninjured one, bringing it to his lips. "Stay tonight," he said. "It's too late and too cold for the trip back to town. Mrs. Gunderson can chaperone. Your reputation will remain intact." Viola hesitated only briefly. The thought of the cold journey back to town was unappealing, and the idea of leaving Fletcher while he was injured even more so. "All right," she agreed, "but only because it's practical, not because I'm worried about you." His smile told her he saw through her pretense. Of course, purely practical. Despite his injury and exhaustion, Fletcher insisted on giving Viola a full account of the fire over a late dinner in the kitchen. The North Pasture shelter was completely destroyed, but they had managed to save the cattle and prevent the fire from spreading to the nearby hay storage. "Could have been much worse," he concluded. "We were lucky. After dinner, Mrs. Gunderson showed Viola to one of the upstairs bedrooms, Rose's old room. She explained, providing a nightgown and toiletries. The room was simple but comfortable, with a quilt-covered bed and curtains that matched those in the parlor downstairs. Despite her exhaustion, Viola found sleep elusive. The events of the day kept replaying in her mind: the peaceful tour of the ranch, the sudden emergency, the sight of Fletcher returning injured but triumphant. It was a glimpse into the reality of ranch life, with its unpredictability and occasional danger. Yet rather than frightening her, the experience had only deepened her feelings. Seeing Fletcher in his element, commanding his men, risking himself to protect what he had built, revealed another dimension to the man she was coming to love. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Opening it cautiously, she found Fletcher standing there, his hair damp from washing, wearing clean clothes but still looking weary. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "Make sure you had everything you need." "I'm fine," she assured him. "How's your arm?" "Painful, but I'll live." He hesitated, seeming reluctant to leave. "I'm sorry about today. Not exactly the visit I had planned. Don't apologize. I'm glad I was here." Viola smiled softly. "It helped me understand your life better." Fletcher studied her face in the lamplight. "And did it change your mind about us?" "No," she said without hesitation. "If anything, it confirmed what I already felt." Taking a deep breath, she added, "I love you, Fletcher. Today just showed me another reason why." The weariness seemed to lift from him at her words. He stepped forward, cupping her face with his good hand. "I love you too. Have from the beginning, I think." Their kiss was tender, a gentle affirmation of feelings that had grown steadily stronger over the months since their first meeting. When they parted, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not someday, not eventually, soon. I don't want to wait any more." Viola's heart swelled with joy. "Yes," she agreed, "soon." His smile illuminated the dim hallway. "Good night then, Viola Keller. Sleep well, knowing you've made me the happiest man in Nevada territory." "Good night, Fletcher Patterson," she replied, reluctantly stepping back into her room. "Dream of the future. I know I will." Spring came slowly to Kingston that year, the snow melting grudgingly under the strengthening sun. By March, patches of green began appearing on the hillsides, and the schoolchildren grew increasingly restless, their attention drawn to the windows and the promise of warmth outside. Plans for Viola and Fletcher's wedding progressed steadily. They had settled on early June, after the school term ended and before the summer heat became too intense. Reverend Walsh would perform the ceremony in the same church where Viola had once been pushed down the steps, and where Fletcher had declared that she stood with him. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Are you nervous about getting married in that church?" Fletcher asked one evening as they walked along the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse, newly freed from ice. After what happened there, Viola considered the question seriously. No, she decided. It seems fitting somehow, coming full circle. Besides, most of the congregation has apologized in one way or another over the past months. It was true. As Viola had proven herself as a teacher and become an accepted part of the community, many who had participated in or witnessed her humiliation had found ways to express regret. Mrs. Harris with a freshly baked pie, Mr. Simmons with extra funds for school supplies, even Mayor Thornton with a grudging acknowledgement of her positive influence on the town's youth. "They may have apologized, but I haven't forgotten," Fletcher said, a protective edge to his voice. "Or entirely forgiven." Viola squeezed his hand. "Then it's good I'm marrying you and not them, isn't it?" His expression softened into a smile. "Very good indeed." As the wedding approached, practical matters demanded attention. Viola would move to the ranch after they married, necessitating a new teacher for the fall term. The school board, under Fletcher and Mr. Simmons' guidance, began advertising early, determined to find a suitable replacement. What if no one applies? Viola worried one Sunday as they shared dinner with Faye. "The children's education is too important to leave to chance." "Someone will apply," Faye assured her. "Kingston's growing. It's not the remote outpost it once was." She gave her brother a meaningful look. "Besides, we've learned our lesson about judging newcomers too harshly." Fletcher nodded. "We'll find someone suitable, and if necessary, you could continue teaching until we do." "But the ranch is so far from town," Viola protested. "The journey each day would be impractical, especially in winter." "We'll figure it out," Fletcher promised. "Together." Late April brought a letter that changed everything. Viola was grading essays when a knock at the schoolhouse door revealed Mayor Thornton holding an official-looking envelope. "This came on today's stage," he explained, handing it to her. "From the Territorial Education Board in Carson City." Curious, Viola opened the letter while the mayor waited, his expression suggesting he already knew its contents. Inside was a formal commendation, recognizing Kingston School for outstanding student achievement based on the standardized examinations administered earlier that spring. "Our students scored highest in the territory," Viola breathed, scanning the letter with growing amazement. "All of them, not just the older ones." "Yes," the mayor agreed, looking both pleased and slightly uncomfortable. "It seems your unconventional teaching methods have proven effective." Accompanying the commendation was an invitation to address the Territorial Teachers Conference in Carson City that summer, sharing her methods with educators from across Nevada. "This is wonderful," Viola said. "The children will be so proud." "As is the town," Mayor Thornton admitted. "The council has voted to increase the teacher's salary for the coming year $30 a month, plus improved accommodations." "That's very generous," Viola replied. "Though, as you know, I won't be teaching after June." The mayor shifted uneasily. "About that." "The council was hoping you might reconsider. Perhaps continue teaching while maintaining your personal arrangements with Patterson." Viola blinked in surprise. "You want me to stay on as teacher even after I'm married?" "The results speak for themselves, Miss Keller. Kingston needs you." The admission seemed to cost him considerable pride. "Arrangements could be made, a horse or buggy provided for your daily travel, perhaps." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Viola. The same town officials who had once pushed her down the church steps were now practically begging her to remain as their teacher. She thought of her students, of the progress they had made together, of the plans she still had for improving the school. "I'll need to discuss this with Fletcher," she said finally. "It would affect our lives significantly." The mayor nodded. "Of course, but please consider it carefully. Good teachers are hard to find, especially this far from civilization." With that parting comment, half compliment, half reminder of Kingston's precarious position on the edge of the frontier, he took his leave. That evening, Viola showed the letter to Fletcher as they sat on the porch of her quarters, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. "Highest scores in the territory," he read, pride evident in his voice. "I'm not surprised. You're a born teacher, Viola." "The mayor wants me to continue teaching after we're married," she said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "The town council is offering $30 a month and transportation to and from the ranch." Fletcher was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than displeased. "Would you want to?" he asked finally. "It would mean long days, especially in winter." "I love teaching," Viola admitted. "The thought of giving it up completely has been difficult, though I've been reconciling myself to it for the ranch's sake." "The ranch doesn't need you every moment of every day," Fletcher pointed out. "Mrs. Gunderson manages the house admirably, and I have hands for the livestock." "Your skills lie elsewhere." Hope flickered in Viola's chest. "You wouldn't mind if I continued teaching?" "Mind? Viola, I've seen what you've accomplished with these children. How could I ask you to abandon that?" He reached for her hand. "Besides, a wise woman once told me that her reputation was her own to risk. I believe the same applies to her talents and passions." Viola leaned into his side, overwhelmed by his understanding. "We would have less time together." "Quality matters more than quantity," Fletcher replied. "And we'll have evenings, weekends, holidays." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "If this is what you want, I support it completely." "I do want it," Viola admitted. "At least for now. Perhaps not forever, especially once we have children of our own, but for the coming year, yes." "Then it's settled." Fletcher's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Mrs. Patterson will continue to shape young minds while Mr. Patterson tends his cattle. Kingston may never recover from such a progressive arrangement." Viola laughed, turning to face him fully. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Fletcher Patterson?" "Not since breakfast," he replied solemnly, though his eyes danced with humor. "Well, I do, completely and without reservation." "Good," he murmured, drawing her closer, "because the feeling is entirely mutual." Their kiss, witnessed only by the fading light of the setting sun, sealed a partnership founded on mutual respect, an understanding a far cry from the conventional marriages that surrounded them, but perfect for who they were and what they had already overcome together. The first Saturday in June 1877 dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for a wedding. Kingston had embraced the occasion with enthusiasm, decorating the church with wildflowers gathered from the surrounding hills, and preparing a celebration in the town square to follow the ceremony. Viola prepared for her wedding day in Faye's boarding house, where she had moved her belongings after vacating the teacher's quarters in preparation for the next term. The blue dress she had worn to the Founder's Day dance had been carefully altered into a wedding gown, with lace from Faye's own dress added at the collar and cuffs. "You look beautiful," Faye declared as she helped Viola with the tiny pearl buttons down the back of the dress. "My brother won't know what hit him." Viola smiled nervously at her reflection in the mirror. "I can hardly believe this is happening. A year ago, I was teaching in San Francisco with no idea my life was about to change completely." Life has a way of surprising us, Faye agreed, adjusting the small wreath of wildflowers that crowned Viola's auburn hair. The trick is recognizing the good surprises when they come along. Fletcher was certainly a surprise, Viola admitted. Not at all what I was expecting when I came to Kingston, and you were exactly what he needed, whether he knew it or not. Faye stepped back to admire her handiwork. There, perfect. A knock at the door revealed Reverend Walsh, who had offered to escort Viola to the church in the absence of any family to give her away. "Miss Keller," he said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, "you are a vision. Fletcher is a fortunate man indeed." "Thank you, Reverend," Viola replied, accepting his arm. "I believe I'm rather fortunate myself." The walk to the church seemed both endless and over in an instant. The town had turned out in full force, lining the street to witness the procession. Viola was touched to see her students waving excitedly, the girls clutching bouquets of wildflowers similar to her own. At the church steps, the same steps where she had once been pushed, and humiliated Viola paused briefly, her hand tightening on the Reverend's arm. "All right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she assured him, straightening her shoulders. "Just remembering how far I've come." Inside, the church was transformed from the hostile environment of her first visit to a place of celebration. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the flower-draped altar where Fletcher waited, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a new black suit. As Viola moved down the aisle on the Reverend's arm, her eyes locked with Fletcher's, and all her nervousness evaporated. His face, usually so controlled, reflected everything he felt: love, joy, wonder, pride. He had never looked more handsome or more vulnerable than he did in that moment, watching her approach. When she reached him, Fletcher extended his hand. "You're breathtaking," he whispered as she placed her fingers in his. "So are you," she replied, meaning it. The ceremony was simple and traditional, with one notable exception. When Reverend Walsh asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" the entire congregation responded in unison, "We do," a gesture organized by Viola's students to acknowledge her place in the community that had once rejected her. Tears sprang to Viola's eyes at the unexpected show of support. Beside her, Fletcher squeezed her hand gently, his own eyes suspiciously bright. The exchange of vows was heartfelt, both of them speaking clearly and without hesitation. When Fletcher placed the simple gold band on her finger, his hands were steady despite the emotion evident in his voice as he repeated, "With this ring, I thee wed." "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Walsh declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Fletcher needed no prompting to kiss his bride. His lips found hers with a tenderness that belied the strength of his feelings, appropriate for the setting but promising much more once they were alone. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher Patterson, the church erupted in applause and cheers, led by the exuberant Swenson twins, who had somehow procured small bells that they rang with enthusiasm if not timing. The celebration that followed in the town square was a true community affair. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by every household in Kingston. A small band played lively tunes, and children darted between the adults, their usual decorum abandoned in the festive atmosphere. Fletcher kept Viola close throughout the afternoon, his arm around her waist or her hand clasped in his, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. They accepted congratulations from what seemed like everyone in the county, including a grudgingly cordial Mayor Thornton and a surprisingly sincere Dr. Bennett, who had begun courting Faye in earnest over the past months. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the celebration, Fletcher leaned down to whisper in Viola's ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Patterson?" Home. Such a simple word, yet so profound in its implications. Viola nodded, suddenly eager to begin their life together away from the watchful eyes of the town. They made their farewells amid good-natured teasing and well wishes, then climbed into Fletcher's wagon, which had been decorated with ribbons and flowers by his ranch hands. As they drove away, the sounds of the celebration gradually faded, replaced by the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wagon wheels. "Happy?" Fletcher asked, his eyes on the road but his attention clearly on his new wife. "Completely," Viola assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "It was a perfect day." "It's not over yet," he reminded her, a hint of promise in his voice that sent a shiver of anticipation through her. The Triple P Ranch was quiet when they arrived, the hands having been given the evening off to enjoy the town's celebration. Mrs. Gunderson had left a cold supper in the kitchen and fresh flowers in the master bedroom, before discreetly departing for her sister's home in the next valley, giving the newlyweds complete privacy. Fletcher carried Viola across the threshold of the ranch house with an easy strength that reminded her of how physically powerful he was beneath his usually gentle demeanor. Inside, lamps had been lit, casting a warm glow through the rooms that would now be their shared home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Patterson," Fletcher said, setting her on her feet in the parlor but keeping his arms around her waist. "Say it again," Viola requested, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "Mrs. Patterson," he repeated, lowering his head to brush his lips against her temple, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "My wife. My love." Their kiss deepened, all the restraint of the past months dissolving as they acknowledged what they had both been anticipating. Fletcher's hands moved reverently over the silk of her dress while Viola's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. "Upstairs," Fletcher murmured against her lips, his voice husky with desire. "I want to do this properly." He swept her into his arms once more, carrying her up the stairs to the master bedroom, their bedroom now where the last light of day filtered through curtains Mrs. Gunderson had thoughtfully left open to catch the sunset. What followed was everything Viola had dreamed of and more. Fletcher was a patient and attentive lover, his strength tempered by tenderness as he introduced her to pleasures she had only vaguely understood existed. Their bodies joined as their hearts already had, completing the union begun months ago when he had declared that she stood with him. Afterward, lying in his arms as night settled over the ranch, Viola traced lazy patterns on Fletcher's chest, marveling at how right it felt to be here with him. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers combing gently through her unbound hair. "That I'm grateful for everything that led me here," she replied honestly. "Even being pushed down those church steps, if that hadn't happened, if you hadn't been passing by at that exact moment." "I would have found you eventually," Fletcher said with conviction. "Some things are meant to be, Viola." "You believe that?" she asked, surprised by this philosophical side of her practical husband. "I do." He shifted to look into her eyes, his expression serious. "What else explains a former outlaw finding redemption, a schoolteacher finding a new beginning, and both of them finding each other in a dusty mining town in the middle of nowhere?" Viola smiled, unable to argue with his logic or the evidence of their own unlikely journey. "When you put it that way, it does seem like fate, or divine intervention," Fletcher suggested. "Reverend Walsh would approve of that interpretation." "Either way, I'm thankful," Viola said, snuggling closer to his warmth. Fletcher pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "As am I, more than I can express." Outside their window, stars appeared one by one in the vast Nevada sky, witnessing the beginning of a life together that had seemed impossible just months before. Within the walls of the ranch house, Fletcher and Viola Patterson drifted to sleep in each other's arms, secure in their love and the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else together. 10 years later, the Triple P Ranch had grown to become one of the most prosperous in Nevada. Fletcher and Viola Patterson had built a life that exceeded both their dreams, raising a family while maintaining their individual pursuits. Viola had continued teaching for 3 years after their marriage, commuting daily to Kingston until the birth of their first child, James Thornton Patterson, named, to everyone's surprise, after the mayor who had gradually become one of their strongest supporters after witnessing Viola's dedication to the town's children. After James came Elizabeth Rose, named for both Fletcher's mother and sister, and finally twin boys, Daniel and David, whose arrival had been as unexpected as it was joyful. With 4 children under the age of 7, Viola had reluctantly given up formal teaching, though she maintained close ties with Kingston School, occasionally substituting and serving on the school board alongside her husband. The Patterson home had expanded along with their family. A new wing had been added to accommodate the children, and the parlor had been enlarged to serve as a makeshift classroom, where Viola taught her own children, and several from neighboring ranches 3 mornings a week. Fletcher, at 47, had silver threading his dark hair at the temples but remained as vigorous as ever, now with the assistance of James, who at 9 showed every sign of inheriting his father's affinity for ranching. Elizabeth, 7, was her mother's daughter, always with her nose in a book, while the 5-year-old twins were a whirlwind of activity that kept everyone on their toes. On a warm June evening, their 10th anniversary, Fletcher and Viola sat on the wide porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set behind the distant mountains. Mrs. Gunderson had taken the younger children to bed, but James had been allowed to stay up a bit later, a privilege he treasured. 10 years, Viola mused, her hand resting comfortably in Fletcher's. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found me on those church steps. Best thing I ever did, Fletcher replied, raising her hand to his lips. Even if I didn't know it at the time. Viola smiled, watching as James demonstrated his roping technique for an imaginary audience. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come along at that exact moment? No, Fletcher said simply. Because I did, and here we are. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a rider, Dr. Bennett, now married to Faye and serving as Kingston's mayor as well as its physician. He dismounted with the ease of a man who had spent much of his life on horseback, despite his medical profession. "Evening, Pattersons," he called, approaching the porch. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Thomas," Viola assured him. "Is everything all right with Faye?" "She's fine, just busy with the Ladies' Aid Society's summer preparations." He produced an envelope from his jacket. "This arrived on today's stage, Territorial Governor's Office, addressed to both of you." Curious, Fletcher accepted the envelope and opened it, scanning the contents quickly before passing it to Viola with a bemused expression. "They want us to represent Nevada at the National Education Conference in Washington, D.C., he explained to Thomas. "Apparently, our little school program for ranch children has attracted attention." The program had been Viola's idea, a way for children from outlying ranches to receive education, even when regular school attendance was impractical. She had developed materials that parents could use at home, supplemented by weekly gatherings at the Patterson Ranch where she provided more formal instruction. The success of the program had spread to other remote communities across Nevada. "Washington," Thomas exclaimed. That's quite an honor. It is, Viola agreed, still reading the letter. They want us to speak about rural education initiatives and how they might be implemented nationally. Will you go? Thomas asked. Fletcher and Viola exchanged a look, a silent communication born of 10 years of marriage and shared purpose. We'll have to discuss it, Fletcher said, though his expression suggested the discussion was a mere formality. It would mean leaving the children and the ranch for several weeks. Faye and I would be happy to help with the children, Thomas offered, and your foreman could handle the ranch. You've built a solid operation here, Fletcher. It won't fall apart without you for a short time. Later, after Thomas had departed and James had finally been persuaded to bed, Fletcher and Viola lingered on the porch, the letter from the governor lying on the small table between them. Washington, Fletcher mused. I never imagined I'd see the nation's capital. Nor I, Viola admitted. It's a long way from Kingston. A long way from those church steps, Fletcher agreed, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Would you like to go? Viola considered the question seriously. Yes, she decided. I would, not just for the honor but for what it represents. The work we've done here matters beyond our little corner of Nevada. Then we'll go, Fletcher said simply. The ranch will survive. The children will probably spoil terribly under Faye and Thomas's care, and we'll have an adventure together. An adventure, Viola repeated, smiling at the thought. We've had quite a few of those over the years. And many more to come, Fletcher promised, rising from his chair and extending his hand to his wife. Starting with right now. I believe I promised you a private anniversary celebration once the children were asleep. Viola placed her hand in his, the same hand that had reached for hers 10 years ago on those church steps, offering salvation when she needed it most. So you did, Mr. Patterson, and you always keep your promises. As they walked into their home together, arms linked and hearts still in perfect harmony after a decade of marriage, neither could have imagined the frightened woman and the determined cowboy who had met that fateful evening in 1876. Those people existed now only in memory, transformed by love, time, and shared purpose into the couple they had become, partners in every sense of the word, united by a bond that had begun with a simple declaration. She stands with me. In the years that followed, that statement proved to be not just a moment of defiance, but a prophecy fulfilled beyond either of their wildest dreams.